And I realized that now is the time. And if I don't do it, I will never do it. And then the fear and the comfort and complacency and the great job and security, all those things will take me 10 years further and another 10 years. And then I'll look back and I will have those regrets that I've never tried something I really wanted to try.
I'm Amy Jo Martin. Welcome to the Why Not Now show. You know that thing you've been thinking about doing? Yeah, that one. Why not now? Have you ever actually taken the time to ask yourself, what's stopping me? Let's talk it through. This is your chance to give that idea the attention it deserves and take action. Each episode, I have a chat with a fascinating person, from entrepreneurs to athletes, celebrities, my parents, rocket scientists, and all walks of life. We talk through a critical time when they've asked themselves, why not now? We dissect that day or even that moment, step by step. Liya Sharif is on the show today. She's a friend of mine. We are involved together in a stealth startup that is so exciting. Can't wait to share more about that. And she is a former corporate renegade, leading marketing at Qualcomm, turned just renegade, period. She is in a redreaming phase of her life. She has taken on her full-time role in interior architecture school and is also exercising other parts of her brain, her curiosity, and her interest. And it's so fascinating and relevant. Now, that's what Liya is doing. But as a result, you can tell her journey is not traditional. Let me tell you more about who Liya is. Liya does not conform. She is following her curiosity. We talk through her roots. She started dancing at age 9. She became a professional ballerina at age 16. As you can imagine, there was a lot of discipline in her life and suppression, but also this form of self-expression through dance. And we really kind of look into and dive into how that has informed how she leads her life now. It's not very often you hear of executives from global brands that leave and decide to pursue other things. Liya talks through how she did an audit of her life and she realized there was nothing wrong. You know, she had this powerful, wonderful career. Everybody, supports and celebrates us when we reach these heights that appear to be societal wins. But she still decided to follow her curiosity. One of the things we talk about is the flexible time schedule that she was craving. We also talk through her desire to always know what it is to be a beginner, what it feels like to be a beginner. What I love about this is, although, yes, Liya may have started in a few new beginning points, her career collateral is transferable, right? Her intellectual collateral is also transferable. And so that equity and that influence just plugs right into that next thing, even though potentially from a core skills perspective, where she's now designing stools in interior architecture school, that might be toward the beginning phases, but she's able to leverage what she's learned in her experience along the way. Liya and I talk through her rigorous education. We talk through her point of view on Ukraine and the war. As a woman who lived in a scenario in society that was extremely intense, and then immigrated to the United States, she has some very strong opinions about what is going on right now. And we do discuss that. And I'm so grateful that she is open and she has been willing to share her voice, because it's not every day you get to hear from someone about their point of view on what's happening now. Something happened toward the end of our recording when we spoke for this interview, and I noticed behind Liya there was this piece of art, and it appeared to be the Ukrainian flag. Well, what you see is the blue of the flag kind of crying and bleeding into the yellow. And I said, "What is that behind you?" Because we were talking about Ukraine. And you will hear her point of view and how passionate and strongly she feels. And she said, "My husband painted that, actually." And I said, "Wow, that is such a cool piece." Well, long story short, her husband, who is also a corporate executive, still currently active in the corporate world, he has been experimenting and really exercising his desire to explore art. And sure enough, I have the piece sitting right here. It is called Crying Ukraine, and I'm also linking to the art on the show notes before on the Instagram account, Pete Lancia Art, PETELANCIAART. So you can go to Instagram and check that out. There's a link in the notes below. Let me share a little bit about this piece. So Pete is Liya's husband, and they have Liya's mother living with them. Now, one of Liya's mother's caretakers is Ukrainian, and Pete is very close to her. And she happens to play around with art as well. So in support of her, he tried something new for her, and that represented both how he felt toward the suffering going on and what he believes to be one of the emotions of every Ukrainian. Now, this was so incredible to receive in the mail. And I also just want you to know both Liya and Pete have shared a link. If you are looking to donate, looking to support, there is a link that they have provided that has been vetted, and it is a destination, a trusted source for where you can support and give if you feel that is something you want to do. I'll just wrap up by saying, a few months ago, I didn't know how to help other than donating. And I know a lot of people feel that way. And after being a few months out from the start of the war, and it's not quite as heightened in the news with the news cycle, one of the things that I fear is that these stories aren't being told. And I didn't know what else I could do. But what I did know is that if I kept that top of mind and in my awareness, if I continued to share with people my desire to help, something would start to happen. I would identify different opportunities. And that's exactly what's happened in multiple different occasions. I now have at least 3 very unique, specific situations that have surfaced as a result of just talking about the desire to help and being connected with different individuals in different ways. So if that is something that you also feel, I just encourage you to share with your friends and family. You can share on social that you want to be helpful. And that doesn't always come in the form of money. That's great if you can donate and support, but there are other ways that we can definitely support. So without further ado, here is the incredible Renegade, Liya, and I hope you check out these links below in the show notes as well. As many of you know, I'm a huge advocate for Dell Technologies, for the brand, for what they stand for how they operate, and their impact in the world. I'm fortunate, along with the rest of the Renegade team, to have an inside look at their culture, to work with them pretty intimately. And I can tell you this company and their leaders walk the talk. You can learn more about Dell Small Business by following @DellSmallBiz on Instagram and Twitter. And specifically for female founders and entrepreneurs, the Dell Women's Entrepreneur Network, or DWEN as we call it, is running their Dream Tech contest, where your entrepreneurial story could win up to $40,000 in Dell Tech. Applications are open now. You can head to dwen.com/AmyJo. That's DWEN.com/AmyJo. And you can learn about everything and apply. Liya, thank you so much for joining me today. I've been looking forward to this. And in the spirit of why not now, can you tell me about a time when you had a big decision to make and you had to ask yourself, why not now? We'll dissect that day, minute, hour, season, and really understand how you went from idea to action.
Wonderful. Hi, Amy Jo. It's great to see you. You look beautiful, as always. There were multiple times in my life that I've been asking that question because I realized when you invited me to this podcast is that my entire life has been about why not now moments. And it really stems from probably just how I think and how I function. It's really all about this process of continual renewal, which drives creativity, which drives ideas, which drives youthfulness and all sorts of things in life that make me really excited. But most importantly, it's about continuous growth and learning. So I'm a lifelong learner. And it's not always about education or learning something new. It can be really a massive life change transition, and it can be a very difficult transition. But again, at the end of the journey, it brings you to something really special and an experience that you cherish. So my last why not now moment, which I'm going to touch on because it's a later life transition, several chapters of life as always for all of us, but this is the most recent one, has been around leaving corporate world and stepping out from a really powerful, wonderful career, which I loved, people that I loved, company that I loved, all those things that made me successful in that domain. And standing back, leaning back, and thinking about what it is I'm passionate about in the next phase of my life, and doing kind of audit of my life. And that why not now was about leaving the corporate world right now, taking kind of a hopefully sometimes sabbatical, and going back to school at my age, which is not always easy to do. It's a completely new field, and just pursuing a passion around design. I'm currently in the interior architecture school here in San Diego, full-time, studying interior design. I'm super passionate about creative fields. I've always been close to art and performing arts in particular. But this is a new field, and I made a huge leap. I mean, I just left. Obviously, I have a great support structure. I'm very fortunate with my husband, who agreed to this aventure, like we would call it, and move on and try that out for a couple of years and see where it takes me. But I'm learning completely new field from zero. I'm a beginner. I'm a beginner again. It's kind of like a Zen moment. What does it mean to be a beginner? It's letting go of ego, letting go of everything you know, leaving behind everything you knew, and then starting over at a kind of later stage in life. So that was my why not now during COVID. So we'll see where it takes us, whether it's good or bad, but that's where we are. That's where I am.
Oh, I cannot wait to hop into this more. So you started, Liya, by talking about continual renewal and that continuous renewal. And I'd like to let's just shelve what the very next step was when you decided to leave the corporate world in this very prestigious and successful position that you were happy with, and what you ended up doing next, because I want to go back there. But there is a cyclical trend here in your life where you've been doing this all your life. And if we could connect the dots and backtrack to your childhood, for those listening, so they can catch up and hear about this continual renewal that's not a new thing for you, but as you mentioned, it constantly puts you back into those beginner shoes. Can you talk a little bit about your roots and where this passion for driving creativity, ideas, that continuous renewal around youthfulness and learning kind of stemmed from, and how you got started, because it's such a fascinating story.
Yeah. Well, I'll just take us back really quickly to where I come from. I come from a former Soviet Union, which is all over the news right now again, with this war that's going on in Ukraine. But I was the last generation of the Soviet Union people who were sort of at the tail end of everything that was going on there before the wall came down in 1989. So I grew up there, and I lived in a country called Azerbaijan, Baku. As some know, that 16 countries were colonized by the Russian Empire, which is what again I'm reminding all of us as to why this war right now is so difficult, is because all these republics and countries, one of them I come from, and my mother comes from Georgia, which is also in the news a lot right now. We were all part of this huge Union colony. So I grew up in the Soviet Union. I learned Russian. I speak Russian. I'm actually Russian cultured partially. So we have very confused identities, like any colonies would. If you think about Africa with France, or other countries with Spain colonizing them, this is very similar. So we kind of grew up with this double identity of our own region, our own country and language, and then the Russian culture and Russian country and language. So I grew up in the Soviet Union. It was a closed country. It was a socialist country. It was behind the Iron Curtain. The Western ideas and ideals have been close to us, and we have been exposed to them secretly. We secretly listened to jazz. We couldn't travel. We couldn't access goods and products that are available to everybody, and we didn't have a freedom of speech. So everything that comes with being behind the Iron Curtain was part of my first why not now moment, and realizing that I needed more freedom. Women were suppressed, the ideas were suppressed, the creativity were suppressed. However, parallel with that, that system had wonderful education and allowed people to train and exceed and excel, because the Soviet culture was always about being first and being ahead. So those values also have been embedded in me, and so I've received very rigorous education in dance. I was a professional dancer at 16. I had my degree, and I trained. They say 10,000 hours in something makes you a professional. So I trained probably more than 10,000 hours when I started at the age of 9 years old. So when I graduated, I was a professional dancer. It was a couple years before my immigration. And that was the first big why not now moment that I needed to move out of this constrained environment. And I think that was, again, part of my personality of taking risks, moving into the unknown for betterment of myself and my family. And in that case, I was very young, and the decision was very clear to immigrate and to leave this suppressive environment and move into a place where my ideas and my pursuits can be both recognized and respected. But that discipline of the Soviet upbringing, that dance school, that dance education, has been at the foundation of all that I was able to achieve here. Not just my personality, what I have genetically, but really that environmental, really tough upbringing that used often negative reinforcement to arrive at the results. And so that was the first beginning of the seed of this change and the massive transformation. But it enabled me to grow again through this very difficult journey of immigration and establishing, assimilating. There's just years of assimilation when you come to a new environment, of becoming something. The first part of my life was all about becoming. And now I'm about being. And so you have to arrive to that as an immigrant. You take a long time to become. Because even though you were something already in your old country and your old culture and your culture, when you arrive, you are essentially starting from zero again. And you have to become, assimilate, grow, build. And as a builder, I consider myself a builder. I build something, and maybe that's why I'm in interior architecture school, because it has to do with building environments. You build something beautiful, and hopefully it creates a shell that allows you to continue to grow inside and be comforted. So hopefully that starts an answer for you. I know it's a long way to get to an answer, but it's hard to talk about your life without having to go into some detail. It's just a lot of detail and memories from that part of my life.
Oh my goodness. Well, thank you for sharing. It does shed so much light and connection to, where we started with the conversation. So we will circle back. I think back when we first met, Liya, a few years ago through our good friend Dan Kavi, who's been on the show. So listen back to his episode too. Hey, Dan.
Love Dan. Hi, Dan.
I was just voice noting with him earlier, thanking him for bridging us, because it's just been a joy to get to collaborate with you and get to know you. But
likewise,
that first conversation, I think Dan was pretty quiet and he listened to us talk. And he's such a good, loud listener, by the way. And you were still on that corporate side of the fence, and we talked about dance almost the whole time, I think, because it was this, this connection we both shared, but I was fascinated by your story and how that may play, it's clearly played a role in all of your life, but how it continues to surface in different ways, what you learned. It seems to have a passion for that expression, that creativity, that self-expression, and it makes so much sense now as I think it through, because there was this suppression, but then also this outlet with dance, which I'm sure had of course incredible discipline, but it was a self-expression vehicle. And so it's just kind of it's all clicking when you, and then talking about just immigration is there's so much similarities in startup. You were starting from zero, have nothing, right? Everything is new. And we always talk about in business that 0 to 1 is the hardest part, right? Most people don't get there. And then the 1 to 100, plenty of books and people have talked about this. But it's in your DNA to innovate. So what has dance taught you that you're using today, now that you are probably exercising the most freedom you've felt, yet at the same time with a beginner's mind and starting new things?
Yeah, I think that the two really pivotal things that dance has developed in me is one is discipline. The discipline of getting to the basics every single day, every single moment when you stand to the bar in a dance class, whether you are in level 1 or in level 15, by the time you accomplish your education in dance, you begin with the same basic technique, which is very rigorous, but also can be very mundane, right? It's not that exciting. It's not always creative. What you express later on stage is not what you do in class. In class, you do repetitive, rigorous, daily exercises that increase with complexity over time. This is very similar to a startup. It's not always that exciting. You have small teams, you have many ideas, but you got to get back to the basics in order to build it. Do you have a great idea? Does it have market that can absorb it? All those things. And so it's around that daily discipline that my life has been about, regardless of what I do. And it also gives me kind of this dual capacity, on one end being extremely disciplined and focused, on another end being expressive and creative. And that's what dance gives you. You become both. We often hear about people who are really detailed and really focused, but maybe they're not as creative or strategic, and vice versa, where dance gives you capacity to expand into these both domains, being very disciplined, meticulous, moving step by step into something. And on the other hand, it allows you to make a huge leap, bypassing all the steps and becoming very nonlinear and very creative in the ways you approach life or an idea or a problem. And I think it rewires your brain for life. I have several people I know who are former dancers, ballet dancers. It's very specific to ballet, in my view, who have been trained the way I have been, and then they ended up in business, similarly to my story, women. And somehow they have been successful because I think they bring this unconventional way of thinking into the business environment. My first mentor in the United States, I'll quickly tell you a story because it's an important story of my life. He was an amazing mentor, hired me out of school here in America. I still had poor English and was just starting. And he learned about me. I was introduced. He was running a business in San Diego. And when he learned that I was a Russian ballerina, he immediately hired me, which was really interesting. He went to Harvard and he said that he heard that people who are trained in Russian ballet can actually accomplish a lot because of the way they were trained, the rigorous training, et cetera. So that's how I got my first business job in the US, by this man recognizing that I had something that others may not have by the virtue of this training.
Oh, 100%. I imagine like your operating system and thinking about dance, it's constant focus and flow, that non-linear and the immaculate, articulate, like absolute discipline that you must have,
right,
and rigor, which makes a lot of sense knowing, having, gotten to know you a little bit better. So when we circle back to today, Liya, and where you sit now, which is much different than a corporate environment. I mean, most people are in different environments, even when you're still in corporate right now, because of the dynamics of the future of work and everything. But your days, how do they feel different from before? What is the biggest difference in your actual tangible day?
Well, a couple of differences. One is more flexible, just time schedule. It's not a 9-to-5 job. And you and I have not touched on the fact that we're both involved in a startup right now, but that also occupies my time. So even though I exited to have more free time, I actually have less free time now than I had before. And that's probably just part of my personality. But how it's different, it's more flexible, it's more fluid. And when I focus on my school projects, it's always about either doing something creative or something extremely challenging because I'm at zero base. So I'm constantly coming up from 0 to 1, from 1 to 2, from 2 to 6 in that field. And that basically continues all week long. I also don't have weekends anymore because when in the corporate world, well, a lot of us worked on the weekends and the roles that I've been, honestly. But it's different because I always have projects and they're fluid. So I'm constantly doing something. I'm always occupied. But let me just point at one thing that's happening right now that hasn't been happening in the corporate world. I'm in flow. And this concept of being in flow, I can only connect it to dance because when you come on stage or when you perform like you do speakership, you get in the zone and everything else past and the future is left behind. You're just in the present. So that's what I'm achieving now with my work and school is that all of a sudden I'm back in flow. And I think I just love that so much that it pulls me in.
That's huge. I take copious notes every time I'm talking and you should see the circles around and the quotes. This is so good. There's so many points that you just brought up that I'd love to acknowledge and talk more about. So for those listening, whether you are at a corporate job with a lot of structure, even if you're working from home versus an entrepreneur, solopreneur, whatever you might be doing, what Liya said about she feels busier, you feel busier, you have more flexibility, but you actually have less time. I think that's an important point, and it's not right or wrong, but there are some things I've learned having made that leap as well and worked with so many, especially women and leaders in making that transition from what we considered structured, less control into much more flexibility and freedom, is that you can easily create a worse version of over-programming yourself and lack of boundaries. And I'm just going to call it a prison. You think you're leaving, but if you aren't intentional of what you choose to do and how it appears in your day, you can easily kind of fall back into actually a worse or overcorrect. So I really appreciate that you acknowledge that you're in flow, because that's the ROI right there, right? Like that's the carrot. But it's also not always, the grass is not always greener on the other side. It's sometimes the hopping the fence that's fun. And your flexible time schedule, perceived control is an ingredient of happiness. So that the value of knowing that you do have flexibility if you want it. It's amazing how much we undervalue that in our society, but it's becoming more known.
Yeah, and you can see mental health issues popping all over the place, lack of vacation, lack of ability to stop, 24/7 mobile devices that, we all never leave behind. It becomes a 24/7 on button. And so it is more difficult for me right now, taking back to the ballet training. It's very structured. So part of me have been in a structured environment my whole life. I would find that environment, whether it was one business, even in startups, when I had jobs in startups, they're still structured. Somebody else structures it for you. And in a corporate world, it's completely structured. So another why not now moment for me was to reteach myself not to be always in the structure. So by leaving corporate world, I am pushing myself in another discomfort zone, which is I have to figure out how to structure and find these boundaries, but I'm not trained to do that so well. So I'm learning that component as well as we go. All right, no, this is the boundary. Stop right here. Because I don't really know how to stop. I just keep going. And then I'm burnt out. And
that's that discipline. It's
resentful. Yeah. And then I'm resenting myself for being burned out. And then it's a really bad cycle. So it's better now. I'm much better at figuring out. But again, coming out of structured into unstructured is another reason I'm doing this.
We're going to take a quick break and we'll be right back. Hi, everyone. If you are digging this podcast, please do us a favor and subscribe, rate, and review on iTunes. It just takes a moment and it means a ton to us. Was there a moment, you're a senior leader at one of the largest brands in the world, and you had the role, you had the respect, you had the accolades and the success and case studies. Was there a moment where you just knew this isn't for me anymore?
So it was during COVID when we were all in isolation. And as you know, a lot of people went through self-search and self-realizations and self-discovery, and it just kind of forced us inward. And that was the time when I realized that it is time for me to move on, even if it's not forever. Doesn't mean I'm never going to return in the corporate world. I'm never going to have a formalized job again. That's just that's not the plan. But the realization was, if not now, then when? And if I don't do this now, I will never do this. And then I will. And so I had this vision of a really old person, I don't know, 80, 90, myself, looking at myself into the present moment where I was sitting then, today, 2 years ago. And I realized that now is the time. And if I don't do it, I will never do it. And then the fear and the comfort and complacency and the great job and security, all those things will take me 10 years further and another 10 years. And then I'll look back and I will have those regrets that I've never tried something I really wanted to try. So that was the why not now moment that was triggered by this realization of looking at myself from the future to the present and seeing myself, what will make me happy. I actually want to have a job when I'm 80 that I'm really in love with. So not the job, but the work, do the work. And if you continue doing the work you love, it's no longer work. It's just, I'm really afraid of this idea of being retired. That concept, that really strange concept of being retired, taking trips, long trips, being that person who goes on trips. I'm horrified of that.
No, I think this is huge. So you're a highly creative human being as it is, clearly. But the visualization exercise of imagine you during COVID is probably right when we met. We probably met exactly 2 years ago today, I think.
Exactly.
It really was right then. And I can imagine you visualizing yourself when you're 80 or 85 And where my mind goes is like this spreadsheet cost benefit analysis of you worked very hard to climb a pretty tall ladder that had a lot of carrots along the way and incentives, and you were willing to jump off and really go into the unknown to not have potential regrets. So are you the type of person that makes a decision and you're like, okay, that's it, it's going to happen, we're moving forward? Or was this a long brewing?
This time in my life, it was longer brewing. In the past, it was a lot more abrupt. So the older I got, I learned through meditation and the practice of stopping and doing an audit. And that audit, the older I gotten, the longer the audit took. Because this was a really huge decision. This was massive because it's just, you take everything you've assimilated in 20 years and the success of, to your point, the shattered glass ceiling as a woman from another country, all those components, and then making that big change. So it took me a while.
And thank you for being honest about that, because I think there's sometimes some romanticism of just these knee-jerk reactions and jolts of why not now decision making. And usually that's not the case. It really isn't if you start digging into it, right? It was a brewing. And so those of you listening, if this is resonating and sounding familiar, it's okay to be give yourself grace in making this decision. A lot of times there's parallel and you're still climbing one ladder and maybe starting to build a boat over here and you don't jump to the boat until you know the boat's going to float. But so what's the biggest surprise in all of this to you, this transition?
The biggest surprise is how quickly other doors start opening up. And it's really interesting process. You walk out of something you're really successful at, and all of a sudden you feel there is a fear of missing out. Like, who are you? Your identity is shattered. You're not sure who you are anymore because you're starting something as a beginner after 20 something years of building another career and expertise. And that fear is palpable. Like, you feel it. It's like in your chest. So you start searching for something and grasping at the old things that you know versus the new things that you're learning. But the biggest surprise is that the skill set that you accumulate, the expertise that you have, is valuable. Within 6 months, I recognized that what I've done before has value regardless of what I'm doing now. So I can combine all those things. I can fuse them together. It's not scientific. It's more of art. But the doors started opening up, and I started finding opportunities and interesting conversations with people that really did not require for me to completely leave behind what I already knew.
And it's clear how much you crave being uncomfortable because you've seen the reward of that. Yet at the same time, that bar keeps getting higher of what it means to be uncomfortable. So this was clearly a biggie. But you're basically, that career collateral that you created over those 20 plus years was transferable, you realized, right? Like there's still equity that you're capitalizing on, which is something that I think that we are starting over from scratch. And yeah, maybe some skills but it's always that intellectual capital and that career collateral have opened these doors for you. So I know you and I are working on something pretty special together, and we might tap dance around this topic because we're still in stealth mode, but there's a few things we can say in this incredible startup that really, it's healthcare, bridging, innovative technology and machine learning to bring into healthcare. And this is one of the doors that open for you. How do you evaluate whether or not, clearly you've gone through this one and it's a huge mission, but it's also, you're in your zone of genius when I witness, what you've been able to bring to it. Is there a filter that you go through? Like, yes, no, yes, no. Okay. Let's talk about it.
I think it's an experience of the gut check. even though we call it a gut check and an instinct, that really is not. It's really enough time has passed, enough jobs been done, enough work has been touched, enough people have been met to know better. And so when you see a combination of a purposeful brand or a purposeful company, and for me, again, as I exited a corporate world, the decision was also when I next engaged with any company or any field or any endeavor, it will have to have a purpose that really brings meaning to humanity. And I don't mean to be pompous here. This is really around me arriving at the place where I only want to do work that is really purposeful in the areas that can impact people long term. And so that was one filter. This company that you and I are both involved with has been concerned about the black box of healthcare and realizing the potential of helping people find answers that they currently cannot. So that's one filter. The second filter is just instinctually understanding who is involved. You got to work with people who have been winning before and failing in the right way and learn from that. And so in this case, it definitely has that combination of amazing experience, combined experience between the board and the founders. Board, you are one of them, clearly. So that combined expertise of success and just instinctual knowledge of how to build something that is really needed. So finding that white space in the marketplace. So I kind of recognize that, okay, there is a white space and there's a large market that exists for that. So when you have a combination of all of those elements, I think it becomes pretty easy to make those decisions, at least for me.
The filters that you just shared, they really could be applied, first of all, if you're in a similar spot, find your filters, right? We need some guardrails or some sort of calculus that you're going to weigh decisions off of, and like when doors open, whether or not to walk through. At Renegade, we often talk about flirting with ideas and dating them. And that, and even if it refers to, like you said, that white space, being able to experiment and learn and iterate. So when you were talking about intuition and you're talking about, you've been around the block, you've seen enough brands, it's not gut. I was thinking about the fact that, our intuition is really, it's of course data as well. So you've been training for this moment really hard, especially starting at age 9, for listening to your own intuition. And if we just remove business for a moment, what are some of the things and cues that inform you of what your intuition is telling you?
I think it's patterning of some sort. I have a good sense of how to look at patterns that are repeating, whether they failing patterns or succeeding patterns. And again, bringing it back to dance, when you reach the high level of complexity in that field, you perform very difficult patterns. So to me, I think my instinctual sense and also my analytical side always fight with another. On one end, I have a quick response, but I think it is based on ability mentally to pattern things really fast and then arrive to an answer. I might think it's an instinct, but I don't think it is. I think it actually is a trained over time wisdom that your mind serves you. It's like a program, it just serves you up an answer. And then you weigh the answer against all these different odds. But I do think it's around a certain way of seeing patterns.
Which is interesting because, we're involved in some machine learning and AI. There's a lot of that way that it's wired. Innovation, and getting uncomfortable, leveraging diversity, it's all related. You clearly have a thread of that through your life. I know that you've been a champion for inclusion, diversity, programs for women, and maybe you could give some advice for women on how to to be brave and courageous in situations where they're wanting to drive their ideas forward. I just recently, actually yesterday, had a woman in Renegade. Her company will be, there will be a transaction in the next year or so, and it's private equity owned, and she is the only female on the executive team. And there's a situation where she does hold her own, but she's also not feeling at the moment that she's breaking through with her ideas and driving them forward. So what advice would you give women?
Flipping the narrative.
Okay.
The narrative is that I'm the victim and I'm in the room alone with all these males. And I'm not referring to the person you have mentioned, but I have been in those situations many times. I've often been alone in the room. I'm a tech marketer. I come from technology, and so majority it is male dominated at the executive levels, right? So flipping the narrative from being a victim of being the only and potentially not recognized to being incredibly powerful because you are the only. So think about it. The power that we have being the only in the room is actually recognized by those with us in the room. So by flipping that narrative and standing in your own power immediately resets how you behave, how you communicate, and how you receive that perceived sense of not being accepted.
It's amazing. Absolutely.
So for me, it really worked. And when I speak with younger women who are uncomfortable walking into the room full of other gender, I tell them to feel the opposite, to feel that when they walk into the room, they bring power into the room. They bring something into the room that others are anxious about, uncertain about, unclear about. So own that. And so I know it's easy to say, but when you start flipping that narrative as much as possible, you will recognize that people around you respect you even more for that.
And I look at the successful case studies, the seeing is believing, of course. And so as people see you do that, as they see others, it speaks to the need and the responsibility for us to share our own journeys and how we've navigated, because otherwise, how do we expect that to serve forward? So sharing from a place of service versus look at what I did. It's not about that. It's about being at service, being a guide, not the hero. And thank you for doing what you've done and demonstrating that and being willing to talk about it. So I have a few rapid fire questions if you're game. We'll play a hot seat round. Okay.
I'm game.
Liya, what keeps you up at night?
I actually sleep really well.
That's amazing.
I don't really stay up at night. My cat.
That's a great answer. I wish
She walks on me. She walks on me.
I love it. Enjoy that. When you hear the term renegade, who do you think of?
Revolutionary. Somebody who is really actively rebelling for change.
What's one lesson you find yourself learning over and over?
That the more I know is the less I know.
No, it's a tough one, isn't it? I just said the same thing like 2 days ago in a different way. It's like, wow, this continues to get stronger.
And I would just add to that, just become humbler, be more humble, be more humble, be more humble. That's really a repeat component I have to speak to.
Is there something you've recently read or watched or seen that sparked you to go from inspiration, idea to action and motivation to take some steps forward?
For me, it's this war in Ukraine. I don't need to repeat what we all see. There's a lot we're seeing, but I think it's all about acting with words, acting with action in support of this war ending. Not just saying, not just using words, but being very active in ways that you can either influence others or influence change when it comes to this war. And the goal is to end it.
Mm. And because people are listening, they can't necessarily see what I see. But behind Liya is a blue and yellow piece of art, it appears. it's interesting how that just sitting there behind you this entire time has brought an energy of and yours forward, especially given your background. And thank you for sharing that.
I have to mention, this is my husband's art.
Is it really?
This piece is called Crying Ukraine. You can see that the flag is dripping from one color into the next. And to me, that is a beautiful expression. And again, those are continuous actions that we can take, either by donating, creating something that can bring relief to the people of Ukraine.
Thank you for sharing that. That's really cool. I didn't know he was an artist. You are all very multifaceted and talented.
We are a Renaissance family.
I love it. Does he sell his art?
He hasn't, but he also discovered during COVID that he wants to just try to paint, and he's doing it for joy. But who knows where it goes? He's been painting for 2 years.
Does he have an IG account Instagram account for it by chance? Because people might want to see this Crying Ukraine piece.
Yeah. We need to get that. But a lot of people who've seen this piece are really have gotten really emotional, and he just threw it together over the weekend. This was his idea, and I loved it.
Wow. Yeah. I love it. Okay. I know a girl. I know someone who could help you on that social stuff.
Amazing.
Wow. I want to just tag on to what you just said, because when the war first started, I was absolutely obsessed and couldn't stop, watching just like so many others and listening and Twitter and the news. And I think like all of us, we say to ourselves, well, what can I do? And once we at least surface that question, it's amazing how our awareness will start finding answers. Maybe not right that moment, but just keep asking, because your mind and your subconscious will stick there. And I've arrived at a few different ways that I would have never thought of. Not as obvious, but they work for me. And so you might be surprised at how creative your mind gets, or the energy you exude that attracts others who will help you get more creative or be what she needs. So I think sometimes we might feel so far removed. We're not when we choose not to be, but it's first getting it into the awareness and that desire, and then being willing to take action.
I'm very grateful for what you're doing. And I think you're doing exactly the right things. You're coming from your authentic self, and you're asking what it is I can do. So you're interviewing people from the region. I think you were going to mention that, but those are the acts of kindness. What's not an option is not paying attention, because this war will change all of our lives. It's really the world war. It's not just Ukrainian-Russian war. Because of where I come from, I recognize what this is all after. And it's existential. And so the goodness of what you're doing by bridging that with your listeners, with your viewers, because a lot of people don't understand why this war is gaining so much attention.
I think we all have different assets and resources and levers we can pull, and we just have to be willing to figure out what they are. And they all look so differently. And couldn't agree more. So let's bring it home here. So Liya, you started dancing when you were 9. You went pro when you were 16. Let's go back to that 16-year-old. And here you are. You described the situation. You're standing at the bar. If you could go back and say something to her right now, what would you say?
You're accepted. Don't be afraid. You are good enough. You're just good enough.
Thank you so much for sharing your time and wisdom and the important work that you're doing. And by exposing your journey, others will be aware of what theirs could look like more too, in their own way.
Thank you for this conversation. I just so enjoyed it. And I so enjoy you. You're just brilliant. Thanks for everything you're doing with all of your renegades.
Likewise.
And all these women that are benefiting from your wisdom. Thank you.
Oh, well, you are definitely a part of the community. And for those of you who heard us kind of teasing, we weren't doing that out of this stealth project that we're working on, this company. We will be sharing soon. So know that that's coming very soon. And we cannot
Super exciting.
Cannot wait.
Thank you, Amy Jo.
Hey everyone, thanks for listening to the show. Hit me up on social media to let me know what you think. I'm at Amy Jo Martin on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. And I want to hear your Why Not Now moments so I can share them on the show. Just send me a note to whynotnow@amyjomartin.com. For show notes and other offers, you can visit amyjomartin.com/whynotnow. And while you're there, don't forget to sign up for my email newsletter for exclusive content and announcements. A big thanks to Rock Salt Music for all of the tunes by the talented John Coggins. And of course, a hat tip to Richard Brewer for editing and producing the show. I'll see you next time. And until then, why not now?